Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, an HOA put a lien on my gun range claiming I violated their bylaws. The thing is, my gun range is outside of their jurisdiction and they tried to ruin me. What they didn't know is that I own half of their neighborhood. Let's dive right into the video. And the first malicious compliance Reddit story starts like this. So I need to start this story by explaining that I never wanted to be a landlord. I inherited 18 houses from my uncle when he passed, all clustered in the same suburban development called Karen Estates. Name censored, by the way, for anonymity, and yes, I know I'm very fortunate to be in this position. My uncle had bought them up over the years as investments, and suddenly they were mine along with the headache of managing them. But the real property I cared about was my outdoor gun range, which sat on 40 acres just outside the development boundaries. The gun range had been my passion project for years. I had built it legally, gotten all the proper permits, installed top-of-the-line backstops and safety features, and ran it as a private club. We were not some Yahoo operation, we had strict safety rules, limited hours, and had never had a single complaint from anyone who mattered. The nearest house was over a half-mile away, and the property line of Karen Estates stopped a good 200 yards from my fence, and that is why I was completely blindsided when I got the letter from the Karen Estates HOA. The letter arrived on Tuesday. I opened it expecting maybe something about one of my rental properties, but instead I found a notice that the HOA had placed a lien on my gun range property for non-compliance with community standards. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. The letter stated that all properties within the HOA's jurisdiction must meet their aesthetic and maintenance standards, including commercial properties. They cited issues with noise pollution, visual plight, and failure to submit architectural review applications for various structures on the property. They were demanding I either bring the range into compliance with HOA standards or cease operations. The lien they filed on my property was for $15,000 in fines that had apparently been accumulating without my knowledge. So then I called my property lawyer immediately. Her name was Elliot and she had handled my uncle's estate before. Elliot listened to me explain the situation and then asked me to email her the letter and any property documentation I had. 2 hours later, she called me back and I could hear the amusement in her voice. They don't have a leg to stand on. Your gun range property is completely outside HOA jurisdiction. I'm looking at the plat maps right now. The HOA boundaries are crystal clear and you're not in them. So what do I do? Well, I will send them a letter explaining basic property law. This lien is completely invalid though. They will back down once they realize their mistake. I felt relief wash over me, but it was short-lived, because the next day I got a call from someone I'd eventually come to know as the president of the HOA. A guy I will call president. He had clearly received Elliot's letter. "We don't care what your lawyer says. Your range is a nuisance to this community and we have every right to regulate nuisances that affect property values." My range is not even on HOA property. You're splitting hairs. We represent the interests of this community and your little gun range is a problem. You will comply with our standards or we will make your life very difficult. Something in his tone set me off. The arrogance, the certainty that he could push me around just because he had a title and some perceived authority. I'd been respectful, tried to handle this reasonably, and this guy was threatening me over property he had absolutely no legal claim to. That's when I remembered something important, something I'd honestly barely thought about since inheriting the houses. My 18 rental properties, all of them inside Karen Estates, aka all of them under HOA jurisdiction. I thanked the president for his time and hung up. Then I called Elliot back. "How would you feel about having some fun with this?" I asked. Elliot's laugh told me everything I needed to know. Over the next week, Elliot and I went through the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions with a fine-tooth comb. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic overreach, clearly written by people who loved rules for rules' sake. Every tiny change to a property required architectural review. And I mean, tiny. The covenant specified that any alteration to the exterior appearance of a property needed approval, including, but not limited to, paint colors, roof repairs, landscaping changes, fence modifications, mailbox designs, door replacements, window treatments visible from the street, and even exterior light fixtures. The Architectural Review Committee, or ARC, had 30 days to respond to any application. Apparently, if they failed to respond within 30 days, the application was automatically approved. This was a standard provision meant to prevent the committee from just ignoring applications indefinitely. What made this beautiful was another provision, so the covenants explicitly stated that there were no limits on the number of architectural review applications a property owner could submit, and there were no fees for submitting applications either. And by the way guys, if you can guess what's coming next, let me know in the comments. As a malicious compliance veteran, considering we have read many of these stories already, maybe you have a good idea of what might come next. Also, while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video, because that would help me tremendously. Anyway, this was probably meant to encourage homeowners to seek approval rather than make changes without permission, so I started making plans. First, I needed to document the current state of all 18 properties. I spent a weekend driving around Karen Estates with a camera, taking hundreds of photos. I photographed every shingle, every light fixture, every flower bed, every mailbox, every door and every window. My tenants probably thought I'd lost my mind, but they were used to seeing me around for maintenance issues. Then I started filing applications. I submitted my first batch on a Monday morning, 15 applications spread across different properties, one for replacing 3 damaged shingles on a roof, one for changing a porch light fixture from brass to brushed nickel, one for planting a row of boxwoods along a property line, and one for repainting a mailbox that had some peeling paint. And then one for replacing a section of fence that had weather damage. Each application was meticulously completed. I included photos, detailed descriptions, paint samples where relevant, product specifications for any fixtures or materials, so these were not half-hearted submissions, they were perfect by-the-book applications that the ARC could not reject on technical grounds. The ARC consisted of 3 volunteers. I had done my research. There was the president who ran the committee with an iron fist, there was a retired teacher who seemed to genuinely care about the neighborhood's appearance, and there was someone who had apparently joined the committee just because her husband made her and who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. For the first week, nothing happened. Imagine them looking at my applications, probably confused about why I was suddenly so interested in compliance after years of my properties just existing without much oversight, but then I filed 15 more applications. Different properties, different minor improvements and maintenance items. I was careful to make them all legitimate. These were real maintenance issues or aesthetic improvements. I was not making this stuff up. That's when I got the first phone call from the president. "What exactly are you doing?" "Maintaining my properties. The HOA made it clear that all properties need to meet community standards. I'm just being a responsible property owner." "You have submitted 30 applications in 2 weeks." "Well, the covenants don't specify a limit. I have 18 properties and they all need ongoing maintenance. I'm just following the rules." There was a long pause. "This is harassment." "This is compliance. Your letter about my gun range said all properties in HOA jurisdiction must meet your standards. I'm just making sure my properties meet your standards." Isn't that what you wanted? Insert surprise Pikachu face malicious compliance. And then he hung up on me. I submitted another batch of applications the next day, 20 this time, and I was getting creative. Applications to change the mulch color in flower beds, applications to install new house numbers in a slightly different font, applications to repaint garage doors in the exact same color they already were because the paint was showing minor wear. Every application was legitimate under these covenants, every single one required an architectural review, every single one started a 30-day clock. By the end of the first month, I'd submitted 67 applications. The ARC had managed to respond to maybe 15 of them, the rest was auto-approved when they hit the 30-day mark, and that's when things got interesting. Other homeowners in Karen Estates started noticing that my applications were auto-approving. The HOA had a policy of posting ARC decisions on their community website, and people could see that all these applications were getting approved by default. Homeowners who had been denied applications in the past started resubmitting. Someone who had been told they couldn't paint their front door red resubmitted that application. Someone who had wanted to install solar panels tried again. A family that wanted to build a modest addition that the ARC had rejected for vague aesthetic reasons filed a new application too, and the ARC was drowning. 3 volunteers trying to process applications that were now coming in from multiple homeowners, all realizing that if they submitted enough applications, something would eventually auto-approve just because the committee couldn't keep up. I kept my foot on the gas. I filed applications for touch-up paint on window trim, applications to replace a single fence post, applications to plant individual flowers in existing beds. I was working my way through every conceivable minor maintenance item across 18 properties. President called me again about 6 weeks into my campaign. The president said, "You need to stop this." Stop what? Maintaining my properties? You know exactly what you're doing. You're overwhelming the architectural review committee with frivolous applications. There's nothing frivolous about property maintenance. Every application I've submitted is for legitimate work. If the committee is overwhelmed, maybe the HOA needs to increase the committee size or streamline the process. We're gonna start charging processing fees for excessive applications. This was the move I'd been waiting for. The covenants explicitly state that there are no fees for architectural review applications. It is in section 7, subsection 3. Shall I quote it for you? Another long pause. We will amend the covenants. That requires a vote of the membership though. 75% approval, if I'm reading the bylaws correctly. Good luck with that. I could practically hear his teeth grinding before he hung up, but he had given me an idea. If they wanted to play hardball, I could escalate. I submitted a batch of applications that I knew would cause panic, applications to paint all 18 houses in what I called range target orange. It was a bright safety orange color, the kind you would see on traffic cones or hunting vests. Technically, it was an allowed color under the HOA covenants, which specified that exterior paint must be from an approved palette, but the palette was broad enough that this particular shade qualified as an approved color. I included paint samples, manufacturer specifications, and detailed plans for each property. These were serious applications, properly documented and technically compliant with the covenants. I submitted them all on the same day. 18 applications to turn 18 houses bright orange. My phone rang within an hour. The president was barely coherent. You cannot paint those houses orange. Why not? Show me in the covenants where that specific color is prohibited. It's inappropriate. It's ghastly. It will destroy property values. Then the architectural review committee should review my applications and provide a written basis for the denial. You have 30 days. This is extortion. This is me just exercising my rights as a property owner within the HOA. You're the one who said all properties must meet your standards. I'm just proposing improvements and waiting for your approval or denial. That's how the process works. I heard him breathing heavily. What do you want? Well, I want a written acknowledgement that my gun range property is outside HOA jurisdiction and that the lien placed on it was invalid. I want that lien removed from the public record and I want a written apology for the harassment. And if we do that, you will withdraw these applications? Every single one? Including all the pending ones for the minor maintenance items. Fine, give me a week. But I was not done yet because Elliot had been doing some digging. She had found something interesting. Remember how President had threatened to charge processing fees for applications? Well, it turned out the HOA had actually been charging fees, not to me because I'd been too high profile with my application flood, but to regular homeowners. For years they had been adding a $50 processing fee to architectural review applications, buried in the fine print of the application forms. The covenants explicitly prohibited this. It was right there in black and white, no fees for architectural review applications. Elliot estimated that over the past 5 years, the HOA had illegally collected somewhere around $40,000 in these fees. The money had gone into the HOA's general fund and been used for various projects and expenses. I had a choice. I could take my win, get my acknowledgement letter, withdraw my applications and move on with my life. Or I could pursue this. The thing was, it was not just about me anymore. I'd been talking to some of my tenants and other homeowners in the neighborhood, and a lot of them had been pushed around by this HOA for years, denied reasonable requests for arbitrary reasons, fined for minor violations while board members' properties got passes, charged fees they did not know were illegal. President had made this personal when he threatened me over property he had no claim to. He had shown me exactly who he was. Someone who used a little bit of power to bully people and hide behind rules he himself was not even following. So I made a decision. I told the president that I wanted the acknowledgement letter first before I withdrew anything. He was not happy with that, but he was desperate enough that he agreed. The letter arrived 3 days later, signed by the entire board, clearly stating that my gun range property was outside HOA jurisdiction and that the lien had been placed in error. I had Elliot draft a withdrawal of all my pending applications then. But before I submitted it, I had her file a formal complaint with the HOA board about the illegal processing fees. The complaint was detailed and well documented. Elliot had pulled application forms going back 5 years showing the $50 fee clearly listed. She had documented everything. The complaint demanded a full refund of all illegal fees collected by the HOA, plus interest. Not just for me and my tenants, but for every homeowner who had been charged. The board's initial response was to deny everything. They claimed the fees were for administrative costs and were perfectly legal. Elliot responded with a detailed legal analysis explaining exactly why they were wrong, citing the specific covenant provisions and relevant case law. When that didn't work, Elliot filed a lawsuit on behalf of all affected homeowners. It was a class action representing everyone who had paid these illegal fees. I won't bore you with all the legal details, but here's what matters. The HOA's insurance company looked at the case, looked at the clear language in the covenants, and basically told the board that they were screwed. The insurance would cover some of the costs, but there would be consequences, and a settlement was eventually reached. The HOA agreed to refund all the architectural review processing fees collected over the past 5 years plus interest, and they also agreed to pay attorney fees and to amend their application forms to clearly state that no fees could be charged. The total payout was a staggering $42,000, but more importantly, regular homeowners who had been nickel and dimed by this HOA got their money back. There was one more piece of fallout though. The members were not happy when they found out about the illegal fees. The HOA had to use reserve funds to cover the portion of the settlement that insurance didn't pay, which meant delaying some planned community improvements. When the homeowners found out why the money was actually gone, they were furious. The next HOA election saw a complete turnover. President and the entire board were voted out. The new board was mostly younger homeowners who wanted to run things more transparently and reasonably. One of the first things the new board did was streamline the architectural review process. They created clear guidelines for what required approval and what didn't. Minor maintenance like replacing a few shingles or changing a light fixture no longer needed formal applications. The process for actual changes became faster and more reasonable, and they also established term limits and required board training in HOA law. The new HOA president reached out to me personally to apologize for how I had been treated and to thank me for exposing the fee issue. As for my gun range, it's still operating exactly as it always has. I've never had another word from the HOA about it, and the invalid lien was removed from the public record. Also, I still own all 18 of my rental properties and I maintain them properly without needing to file architectural review applications for every tiny thing. The new HOA is reasonable to work with. I never did paint any of those houses orange, in case you were wondering, though I keep the paint samples in a drawer just as a reminder. The whole experience taught me something important about HOAs and power in general, though some people get a little authority and think it makes them untouchable, and well, they forget that rules apply to everyone, including themselves. And they especially forget that when you try to bully someone by hiding behind rules, that person might actually read those rules and find ways to use them right back at you. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if the president had just responded to Elliot's initial letter by saying, "You're right, we made a mistake, we will remove the lien." That's all it would have taken, an acknowledgement of error and a correction. But his ego would not let him. He had to double down, had to threaten me, had to try to force compliance through intimidation, and in doing so he gave me every reason to really dig into those HOA rules and find every possible way to comply maliciously with them. The satisfaction of watching those orange house paint applications land on his desk will stay with me forever. The image of him frantically calling me, realizing he had backed himself into a corner where he either had to approve bright orange houses or negotiate, still makes me smile. But the real satisfaction came from the settlement checks going out to homeowners who had been overcharged for years. Those fees might have seemed small individually, but they added up, and more importantly, they represented a system that thought it could get away with breaking its own rules. I did not start this fight. I was just minding my own business, running my range, managing my properties and living my life, but when someone tries to use fake authority to push you around, sometimes the best response is to show them what real compliance looks like. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "I Can Stand Longer Than You Can Sit." I used to work for a pharmaceutical compounding company. Pharmaceutical compounding factories are made up of several rooms of varying cleanliness, graded D to A, D being the least clean. These rooms are thoroughly cleaned each day but require special deep cleans at least once a month. I was scheduled to work in the D-box room, grade D, where I would take drugs, diluents, and devices out of their boxes, record the relevant numbers from each individual item before cleaning them with 70% alcohol and sending through an airlock hatch into the grade C room. However, this day the Grade C room, attached to D-Box, was being deep cleaned and couldn't be used until the next day, meaning there was literally nothing to debox. Well, I asked my manager where they wanted me to work this time, and the conversation went as follows. Hey Lisa, since there's nothing in the D-Box, should I go and help with the deep clean or go to Unit A/B, a different set of clean rooms? What does it say on the schedule? It says D-Box, but there's nothing in there, and I don't want to spend hours just standing around. If it says D-Box, then go to D-Box. Lisa, there's a deep clean happening. There's literally nothing to do in the D-Box. There's plenty to do in there, so go and do it. I cannot believe I'm having this conversation with you. Just do as you are told. So I went into D-Box, and the contents of the room were an empty bin, a bottle of 70% alcohol, some wipes, and myself. So I cleaned the room with the alcohol. It's a small room, it took 15 minutes, and then stood still for 2 hours. Over the intercom, the people doing the deep clean asked what I was doing. I relayed to them the conversation I had with the manager, got a laugh, and an honestly not surprising, Lisa is a bitch. I then proceeded to stand still for another hour, and after being standing stationary for 3 hours, Lisa barged into the room and hissed, "What on earth do you think you're doing? You've done nothing but stare at the wall for 3 hours. What makes you think you can get away with doing nothing when everybody else is working so hard?" "I'm doing what you asked me to, Lisa. You told me..." "This was not what I asked you to do. I told you to come in here and do your work." "Well, I told you there was no work in here to do and asked to go somewhere where there was work." "There was work to do in here when I sent you here." "No, there wasn't. I would have asked for something to do if there was." "Get out and go to Unit A. If you ever repeat this stunt, I will investigate you for gross misconduct." If doing what you asked is gross misconduct, you should probably investigate this particular incident. Well, at this point, I walked past her and went and did my job in the other units. Later, I was chatting to the supervisor, who had been set with her on the monitoring station. They told me that she had watched me on the camera for the entire 3 hours, getting progressively more and more wound up. There never ended up being an investigation, and that manager entirely stopped talking to me until she tried and failed to fire me for totally different reasons. And the next one is another fantastic malicious compliance story. It is titled "Assigned Seat." You sure about that? When my wife and I were in college in the late 80s, we had mandatory chapel. They took roll by observing empty seats and then assessing a fine after so many absences. We came to college after my stint in the military. We arrived with 2 small children. The youngest was only a couple of months old and he was a screamer when upset. When we were getting our chapel seats, we asked to be close to the back and on an end so that we could take the baby out if necessary. We ended up in the middle of row L, last row being AA, okay, and we made friends with our nearby students, and we are still friends to this day. Several weeks into the semester, the school president begins addressing the assembly, and my son loses his mind. He's screaming like he's being killed in a pitch that will almost shatter glass. He's not wet, he won't take a bottle or pacifier, and I start to make my way past the 6 or 7 people on the aisle. My wife, through clenched teeth, says, "Don't you dare move." So the little man cries for 35 full minutes, stopping almost immediately when we get up. After chapel, we gather in the student union to get lunch and regroup before our next class. Then comes the dean of students. So I was wondering if you all would be interested in moving to a seat near the back on the aisle. My wife, sweet as pie, says, "We asked for that when we registered, and we were told it wasn't possible. Now we and the kids have made friends with the folks around us." "Dean, we can move all of you?" The rest of our time there, we and our compadres sat no closer than row 5. Added for clarity, row A was at the front, so row L was the 12th row from the front. Row V, or 5, alphabetically, not the Roman numeral, was the 22nd row of about 30 rows, and close to the back and the exit doors. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.